Hi, everybody. My name's Smithy Sinha, and I'm General Counsel at Opus 2. Thank you for joining us today on our session, AI Everywhere. Today, with me, I have my colleague Mark Woods, who's a solution consultant at Opus 2. We also have Joan Washburn, Director of Legal Support Solutions at Holland and Knight, and also Laura Ewing-Pearl, Manager eDiscovery at Baker Botts. Thank you, Joan, Mark, and Laura, for joining us. So why are we here today? It's quite simple. Legal professionals everywhere are feeling the pressure, but also the potential of generative AI. But with so many legal solutions entering the market, it can often be a bit of a challenge to know where to start and how to make informed and confident decisions. That's exactly what today's session is about. We'll hear directly from Joan and Laura, who are involved in making these decisions inside their law firms. We're going to talk about how they approach it, the key questions that guide their buying decisions, the security, compliance, ethical considerations that matter most. We'll also be exploring the different ways in which firms are incorporating AI into their tech legal stack and what that means in practice. So, in a nutshell, the hope is that you walk away informed about how to better apply the insights that will be shared today to your own AI adoption journey. Just a couple of standard disclaimers before we start. The views shared by our panelists are their own, and they don't necessarily represent the views of their firms or employers. And then secondly, we have 45 minutes today and quite a lot of content to cover. So we're not going to be able to get into everything in detail. That said, please do ask questions. The goal is to make this as tailored as and informative as we can. And we have set aside time for questions at the end. So I think we can kick off. Before we get over to our speakers, just to set the scene a little bit, I'm keen to understand where everyone is in their AI journey and the importance you're placing on AI. So if you can take a quick moment to answer the short poll on your screen, it would be appreciated. And we're going to allow about 30 seconds for this and then close the poll and see what the results look like. Thanks, Muna. Perfect. I think I make that about, awesome. Let's have a look. So how often do you use AI in your day-to-day work? Quite a mixed bag. But actually sort of nearly 70% are using it at least several times a week or every day. And then if you're evaluating a new legal tech solution and the vendor had no plans to explore and incorporate AI, would you still consider them? A straight 50-50 split. That's really interesting. Yeah, that one strikes me because, and I like that answer to that one. As much as there's talk about AI and it is here to stay and it's making great improvements, ultimately it still comes down to the fundamentals, right? Is this product going to be useful? Is it going to deliver return on investment? Not just, is it a shiny new tool? So yeah, really interesting results there. Joan, Laura, Mark, any comments from you on those results before we get started?
That actually surprises me that more people aren't considering that a vendor needs to be looking forward and needs to be looking at generative AI tools. I don't know about you, Joan.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way the question was phrased, if you're looking at new legal technology. So obviously, we still have to rely on our legacy tools, but I agree
Right.
that most tools that I look at now, I want to understand how they are going to stay on the leading edge of what we need to practice law. So I'm surprised by the 50-50 split as well.
I
Interesting.
think I'm most surprised by the fact that you've got a majority of folks who clearly use AI and understand it, like because they use it sort of every day or at least on a weekly basis. and yet they would still consider the vendor even if they're not going to incorporate AI. I thought that was a super interesting aspect of it.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you for your comments to the panelists. So moving on to the next slide. Going to start with quite a broad question here. I think if we can go beyond this one. So defining an AI strategy, as we said, with so many tools out there and so many options, what should guide law firms' decisions on where to invest time and resources first? Joan, it would be great to hear your thoughts first on this.
Sure. So I don't like to think of things in terms of tools. So you use the phrase shiny new tool, and I think that is a fool's journey if you're just looking for shiny new tools. The way that I like to look at things is to see how every tool that we look at, I want to see how it threads through the practice of law. If you're just buying a shiny new tool and putting it out there, you're not gonna get buy-in. If you fully understand how to integrate that tool into the practice, and you make that your approach to both choosing the tool and implementing the tool or rolling it out, you have to go in with the understanding that you're going to have to change hearts and minds. And the way that we try to do that is to really understand, if we roll this tool out, how would they use it on day one? How would they use it at each phase of the matter, whether it's a litigation or a transactional matter? And it's sort of that deep understanding of the practice before you purchase the tool, and then that engagement as you are rolling it out. So that's sort of as a firm in general, and for sure in my approach. I don't speak for the firm, as you mentioned, but in my approach is just that, to understand how the practice will use it, and then how does it thread through. Does it just, okay, you've got your work cut out for you, and then, okay, you've got to pick it up and stick it in this thing to use generative AI. That's never going to fly. So it has to be woven in. And that's the approach that we take.
Excellent, thank you. And Laura, you were nodding along to Joan's observations. So as you navigate the solutions that are put in front of you, what do you do to help ensure that those solutions are going to meet your objectives?
Well, Joan's absolutely right that you need to look at how it threads through the entire practice of law, but we also look at our clients' needs. Some of the pillars of our firm are totally client focused. And so what does this tool bring to bear to increase our efficiency, to improve the client experience? Do the clients even want us to use AI? Some clients right now are opposed to using AI, particularly on their data or for any sort of decision making. So we need to be really cognizant of what our own clients are telling us in terms of what sort of tools are going to work best to improve the quality and the efficiency of the services we provide.
Absolutely. And I think what I've heard from both of you there is listening, right? It is listening to both your internal teams, your stakeholders, your clients ultimately as well, who are going to drive the decisions that you make as a firm when seeking to adopt technology. And I think, Joan, I agree with you. I think if we talk about, there's always a concept of shiny new tech, right? Shiny new tools. But ultimately, it comes down to how they're going to be used, right? And the impact and the value that they're going to deliver. When you think about sort of making those decisions, do you have sort of committees or groups of stakeholders that come together to sort of shape how you're thinking about it and how you're approaching it? Joan, you're nodding, so I'll go to you on that one.
We do, actually. We have, and it's not just generative AI. So it's really the way we approach the acquisition of software and tools to as Laura said, bring efficiency to the practice of law. And so we have sort of the higher level. So we have our legal department that sort of drives the policy around what and how we can use generative AI. And to Laura's earlier point, we must get client buy-in for that. It's actually required. We can't touch our clients' data unless they have specifically told us that we may. And so there's that sort of the legal department and the chief knowledge officer, the chief technical or chief information officer. Those decisions are all made at that level. And then we have more in the sort of boots on the ground, which is the camp in which I put myself, right? So directors, managers who we are connected to the practice in ways that the chiefs may not be, right? And so we understand what they need. We understand what they're asking for. And so at Holland and Knight, we do have a legal tech committee. We have a technology and innovation steering committee that sort of drives that approach. And then we have a hey, someone asked for this, let's vet it, see how it works. And so that's our approach. So we have multiple hands in the pot, so to speak. That's kind of a weird thing to say, but lots of people.
I know what you mean.
Spoons in the pot. But yeah.
Fantastic. And Laura, anything to build upon that?
We actually operate in a similar way with a steering committee, but input from different departments. So we can't know everything about every tool that is being introduced. There are so many being introduced right now. So we do rely on different practice groups coming to us as a practice support group to say, hey, here's something we think could benefit us. And then we go through that entire vetting process, bringing it to the steering committee, discussing pros and cons, that sort of thing.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And I think, just to add to that, from an in-house general counsel world, as a provider of tools, but also as a consumer, I completely agree with what you've said. I think having the right stakeholders involved, because it's not an isolated procurement or legal or security exercise, right? Having those stakeholders involved right from the outset helps deliver the point that both Laura and Joan, you made, which is getting aligned on objectives. And if you've got that alignment on objectives from everybody across the start, that makes the measuring, the assessment, kind of the value so much easier to measure because you've all got that same shared goal. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So going to have a little bit of a pivot now before we get into more of the detail. Approaches to legal tech AI. There's a number of ways that firms are approaching it, and I have questions for both Joan and Laura on this. But Mark, you spent a lot of time at Opus 2 understanding how AI is applied in legal tech. From your perspective, what are the main approaches that you see firms taking when it comes to Gen AI, and how should they be thinking about the differences between them?
So that's an important point or specificity that you added in there, Smitty. Like, we are talking about Gen AI, right? People who have been around in legal tech for a long time know that sort of AI has been around a long time, especially in the eDiscovery world where technology assisted review has been used for years now. But when we like to think about generative AI, and I think we have a slide on this if we want to go to the next one.
Move it along. Sorry. Yeah.
So the way that we sort of like to think about it when you're talking about generative AI is this first category or approach are these general, what I'll call sort of mass market Gen AI tools, right? These are the ones that get all the headlines, like your OpenAI's ChatGPT, right? You've got Microsoft using Copilot. You've got various other tech companies that have these, mass market large language models that are out there and available to the general public to use. And one thing to keep in mind is that legal professionals are included in the list of folks who can use those tools, right? Now, of course, as lawyers, legal professionals, we have to be really careful about how we use them. We can't, put client confidential data in there, but we might use them in our day-to-day work to do some of the tasks that we're working on. Sort of the second category or approach that we like to talk about are, the companies that didn't exist 3 years ago, right? As generative AI has come onto the scene, you've got these companies that have created legal specific workflow products, and they're specifically been created to use generative AI for legal workflows. So like the one that catches most of the headlines would be like Harvey, for example, in the legal tech space, a company that has decided to use generative AI specifically for legal workflows. But that's their thing, right? Their bread and butter is generative AI for legal. And then the third category is what we call at Opus 2 platform integrated AI. And then selfishly, like I just like to say, we're kind of biased because this is how we've approached AI, right? These are those platforms that might have existed for a while where legal professionals were already using them for their day-to-day work. For example, here at Opus 2, people have been using our platform for years to create case chronologies and to keep up with character and organization profiles and do transcript management. But now that generative AI has gotten really popular and it's extremely useful, what we've done is we've incorporated generative AI into those platforms where people were already doing their work. And the purpose is basically to help with those workflows, right? Use generative AI smartly for those specific workflows. So, I mean, I will say that's not the only sort of categories or approaches that you could lay out, right? There are a lot of other ones. In fact, I think Joan, might talk a little bit later in this about how, there are law firms out there that are actually building their own sort of bespoke tools in-house if they've got that expertise. But in general, when you're a legal professional and you're talking about or you're thinking about generative AI, these are the kind of categories that we put things into and approaches that we like to talk about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. So Laura, Joan, taking sort of what Mark has just said, quite a few different approaches. As Mark said at Opus 2, we frame it as these three. With these approaches in mind, when you're evaluating a specific solution, how do you decide which approach to take? And it would be great if you've got some specific examples that you're able to share as well on any use cases that you've had. Laura, I might start with you on this one.
Sure. And I think this is a case in which one size does not fit all. We actually have all three. We have Copilot, so we can get assistance writing emails or drafting a one sheet, those sorts of things that aren't necessarily in the legal sphere. We use Harvey for more legal specific tasks, but even Harvey can't do everything. It's not going to be a tool you use for eDiscovery, for example. You're not going to put 100,000 documents into Harvey and ask it, what sort of products did our opposing counsel sell between the years of 2015 and 2020? So you have specific tools in eDiscovery, something like Reveals Ask, where you can ask it questions of your data. You have eDiscovery vendors like Lighthouse that have tools that can draft privilege log descriptions, but you also have tools that can write contract summaries or look at a dozen different contracts and prepare a chart for you that gives you termination clauses and expiration dates and the total value of the contract. So Harvey's not going to be able to be everything to everybody. So I really appreciate that so many tools are platform specific, that they're integrating AI in ways that are useful for a particular use case.
Absolutely. And Joan, over to you.
Yeah, so we take a similar approach with the addition of what Mark referred to. So we use Copilot. It is mostly, summarize this email, summarize this meeting. I use Copilot to summarize meetings because sometimes I'm multitasking and, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have the kind of belt and suspenders type of approach. And we don't use Harvey or anything like that because we've chosen instead to build our own for that sort of legal specific. So we have our innovation team and our knowledge management team have worked together to build what they call haiku which is the Holland and Knight AI Institute, something like that. I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's kind of catchy, haiku. And so that's basically a back end thing that uses large language models, and we refine the models for specific practice groups. We've done a lot with sort of entity extraction and other things that go beyond what we've been able to find that commercial tools can do, and we can tailor it to the practice. So that works well for us. The other thing that works for us, and again, in the eDiscovery sphere, but also not just, document review, not just, is this document responsive or not? The tools do that. So Relativity, Everlaw, possibly Reveal, they can get us through that. But it's the deeper things. Document review was already essentially outsourced in most large law firms, right? Not many associates and certainly no partners go in and say responsive, not responsive. They want the hot documents. They want the documents linked, the evidence linked to the facts. And so having the platform integrated AI really does give us that opportunity to have the evidence linked to the facts in a way that is defensible. And that also will do things like automatically create a chronology, automatically get your cast of characters, help you to really understand facts. And as I alluded to earlier, we take a day one approach. We want people to be in these platforms from the start of a litigation. If you pick up the phone, it's your client, they tell you, hey, we just got sued. Start to put the facts as you understand them in a platform that can link to the evidence down the line, right? So discovery, I think, has always been considered to be sort of this discrete process, but with these new tools, it's really not. It doesn't have to be. You can have started to build your fact patterns and your understanding of the matter, and then link it to the evidence when you get to the discovery phase. So the use of, and that's not just to Laura's earlier point, it's not just generative AI, it's concept clustering. It's, all of the things that we use that really are machine learning driven and that we have been using for years work very neatly together with these platform integrated generative AI tools. So it's a different approach. And I think law firms are well suited to adopt this approach, as opposed to like the vendor vertical, maybe where they've been, hey, we do the document review. I don't mean vendor like Opus 2, I mean vendor like Lighthouse or Integrion or whatever the eDiscovery vendors. So and it's necessary that the partner understands the facts, right? And so these things really open the door, I think, to earlier and better understanding of fact patterns in complex litigation. And there is a difference. There's a key difference between the way that we use generative AI for, say, contract analysis and things like that. Very complex and obviously, requires a lot. But getting to understand fact patterns in a litigation where, there's the facts differ from each matter to matter, right? And the ability to use these things to extract information from dense data sets is really key, I think, to the way we'll be litigating going forward.
Perfect. Thanks, Joan. Before we move on, both of you touched a little bit upon sort of speed to use, right? Day one in there. We've got only a tiny bit of time left on this section, but when I look at it, kind of bringing in products, one of the things I think about is sort of cost of onboarding, time to onboard, time to use. Is that one of the considerations that factors into your decision making as well? Laura, a quick kind of response from you first, perhaps.
Definitely, because that's part of the change management idea too that Joan mentioned. If people aren't willing to use the tool, then obviously you've sunk your money into a tool that's never going to be used. So it needs to show almost not immediate value, but at least immediate ease of use, so that the people that need the facts, the people that need this evidence to help their case along or need the contract analysis can get in and be able to withdraw that information that they need.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I would simply add to that is that sometimes when it's integrated into a platform that people are already familiar with, there really is, they don't have to learn a new UI. They do, and they sort of can get in and really start to dig in. And so you have to get them conceptually, but if you don't also have to completely retrain them, all the better.
Fantastic. Yeah, I completely agree. Excellent. Okay, so I think we're moving on to the next slide now, which is key questions to us vendors. There are going to be so many different questions that you can ask when evaluating AI solutions. And to the points made by Joan and Laura, it really will come down to the use case. There is no one size fits all. That said, in our experience, we found that they typically fall into a few core categories. Product capability, so does it do what it says it will do? Legal and domain expertise, how suitable and tailored is it for a legal use case? And then what I bucket into trust and risk. So in that, you have security, privacy, ethical, compliance, all of those considerations that are critical. I'd love to hear from both Joan and Laura on those categories in particular. But before we delve too deep, a question for each of you. So we've talked a lot about evaluating AI vendors, aligning on objectives. Is there one critical question or non-negotiable that you always ask when assessing AI legal tech? Yeah, simple question. I think, Joan, over to you.
Absolutely. The first question that we ask is, what is your policy on retention of client data? Because every one of our clients has a prohibition against commingling of data and retention of their data in an LLM. And so that is a question that we ask, and it is it's disqualifying if a vendor can't answer that question for us. We have a lot of questions that we ask, and in fact, we have a department that handles that. But when we are in our initial meetings, we want to understand, do you have a 0-day policy, basically, right? So it goes out, it queries the LLM, but it does not, the LLM does not retain the data,
Right.
Does not retain a record, which I think Mark has an interesting point that he may bring up later about OpenAI and the recent ruling of retention. And there are some LLMs that are programmed to retain history. Grok is one of them, right? So there's these things that you really have to understand what you are using, and what they're how is the code written. If you I mean, I don't know that you need to get into the code. Most of us don't, but you need to understand, are there things that make it implausible or impossible to use in the context of client data and a law firm. And since confidentiality of our clients' data is bedrock, I mean, it is a core belief, and I think it is at every law firm, we cannot work with a vendor that retains the history, retains the logs. And so we don't allow Holland and Knight attorneys to use ChatGPT. Of course, they use it in their life, but it's not a sanctioned thing. It's not a thing that we want our practices using on client data, because we can't determine what the retention is.
What's going to happen and what? Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. Yeah, zero.
That's my key question.
All the time. Laura, over to you. Key question.
100% agree with Joan. And my deal breaker might seem like a kind of no-brainer, and that's that our client data is not used to train any model, as well as not being retained. And while I say that's a no-brainer, I did actually see one statement of work come through that actually had written in, we will be able to use your client data to train our AI models. And it was just like, no, that is a deal breaker. So I think it's very important that we as stakeholders review contracts and statements of work to make sure that we're looking for safeguards around our client data. But I think it's equally important that we have departments within law firms, and for the corporations out there, your in-house legal undoubtedly has departments where it's information security or third-party risk assessment, so that they can get into the nitty-gritty of who's monitoring this, what sort of models are they using, and making sure that the data is completely siloed.
100%. I mean, and I'm not surprised at all by those answers, right? Because when it comes to security, particularly when we're talking about confidential, regulated data, in any legal tech, that's always been at the forefront, right? That's the first thing that you do. Security assessment, show me your security architecture. How are you going to keep my data secure? AI has not replaced that. It's simply added additional complexity and additional questions to ask to ensure you keep the guardrails around that data. Fantastic. Okay. Conscious of time, the next 2 points that I want to touch on are questions around functionality, so product capability, and legal domain expertise. I think in the interest of time, Laura, if I can ask you about sort of when you're reviewing a solution, how do you evaluate the product's sort of claimed features and functionality? What are you asking? What are you looking at?
One of the things we ask for is references. Who else has used the tool?
Right.
Can we speak with them so that we can get real feedback on how the tool accomplishes what it says it's going to accomplish? I think we have two different types of vendors that can sometimes enter this space right now. And one is a group that starts from the tech angle. We've been technical geniuses all our lives. Oh, look, legal now needs this. We're going to create a tool, and it's not necessarily fit for legal. On the other hand, we have legal service providers who've been in that space forever, see generative AI as hot, and want to develop a tool as quickly as possible, and it may not have the necessary generative AI capabilities. So you want to make sure that when you're evaluating a tool, whatever vendor it is that's offering that kind of knows both sides of the equation, and so the tool can accomplish what it actually purports to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then when it comes to sort of legal domain expertise, Joan, what are the specific questions? I mean, to be honest, you've covered it in a lot of your answers already to the earlier questions, but just anything else that you ask when you're assessing a tool to understand relevance and use specific to a legal use case beyond what you've already covered already?
So I think a crucial thing to do is it's not just questions. So if you have an interest in a tool, you really have to test it. You have to be able to do a live POC. We had a recent experience where it's kind of interesting because a vendor came to us. The demo was very, very intriguing. It kind of was a combination of old school machine learning type things and the use of generative AI. And the demo was, well, this is the best thing since sliced bread. When we got into the POC, we found issues with it, and so it did not do what it purported to do. Some aspects of it, particularly the generative AI piece to it, was good, but it was like a chatbot. It's like you can ask a question of these things. And so we have opportunities to do that already with tools that we have, but the core functionality of it just wasn't there. And if we had made the decision based on demos and questions, where they ticked all the boxes, we would have made a bad purchase. So I recommend a POC and
Use it, trial it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get under the hood. Excellent. Okay. I was going to ask about specific security questions that you asked, but both of you in your deal breaker questions gave such a comprehensive response that you've already covered that. Fantastic. Okay, so moving on. So we've aligned our objectives. We've got the right team together. We've demoed the tool. We've asked all the right questions. We've identified it, aligned it against our criteria, and it's implemented. Fantastic. So how do you both go about actually assessing whether that tool is delivering value and delivering the performance that you expected it would? Laura, how do you measure and assess return on investment?
Right now, it's difficult, I think, to get a specific ROI on some of the tools. A lot of the evidence we have, so to speak, is anecdotal, in which the attorneys or the paralegals are raving about the tool. This saved me hours of time, but we don't really have specific metrics around the saved X hours of time. And this translated into Y number of hours that we spent doing more substantive work to help the client. I think it's a little bit easier in eDiscovery to get those sort of metrics, because we can say we did save, say, 36 hours of review time, and that translates to ABC number of dollars. And so in that sense, the eDiscovery side is a little bit easier to measure.
Yeah, it's the sort of it's the tangibles, right? That I think will come in time, but more difficult depending on the use case. Joan,
yeah. And
how are
I
you?
think that the first part of that equation is easy to measure in eDiscovery, right? So you can say, okay, if we do 50 documents an hour, it would cost X number of dollars for the client. If we use coding suggestions or whatever tool we use, we can do it in 20 minutes. That's an obvious ROI. But it also opens up a question with for the firm about how to first of all train people to understand, so you can get a result, right? You can write a prompt and you can get a result. All the time you'll get a result. Whether that result is right or not is the question. And so even in eDiscovery, there is that idea that that you need to validate, and we need to retrain people in both prompt writing, but also validation of the prompts, because sometimes you type something in, you get the result, as we've seen over and over again, you know, even if you think you've got the links to the evidence, you might be making mistakes. And eDiscovery is a little different than a court filing, but it's that validation. It's that ability to write a prompt effectively and then validate it. And until we have that synced up, it'll be really difficult to get a true sense of the ROI. And also, what's the business model going to be going
Right.
forward?
Yeah.
It does require humans still, Joan's right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that, and no one here today knows all the answers. It's going to constantly evolve. It's just staying ahead of it, keep measuring. If you don't, a brilliant colleague of mine always says, you can't measure what you don't have, right? So just that consistent effort to keep measuring, keep assessing. Fantastic. And Mark, I'm keen to hear from you. From Opus 2's perspective, what are your advice and guidance on how to measure impact and ROI?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to say anything that Laura and Joan haven't already hit on, because they are sort of doing this day to day. But you'd be surprised at how many people come to me and they really don't know exactly what they're trying to accomplish from a generative AI perspective. So, knowing that is the most important thing, right? Is it really about efficiency? Like, is that the measurement that we're going for? Which can be a touchy subject with law firms who earn, money based on the number of hours that they work. Or is it more about effectiveness, right? Like you're not really, you expect to take the same amount of time, but you want to use generative AI to sort of supplement and make that work product that you actually do put out more effective. So just knowing that what you're trying to accomplish is the first step. To the extent you can benchmark, of course, we've talked about that. How did you do things before? How does that changing afterwards? And then after you get a tool, you need to reassess later on down the line, are people actually using it? Because if you buy a tool and nobody's actually using it, then you've simply wasted money and you haven't done any favors for anybody. I did want to say one thing that Joan hit on earlier. Just I don't want to leave people hanging. She said that I might mention something about an open AI case. So just know, or people be aware that if you are using a tool that incorporates or uses ChatGPT, OpenAI's model, just know that there's some ongoing litigation in the Southern District of New York. It's styled literally in Ray OpenAI copyright infringement litigation. There was an order issued last week where the judge in that case basically said that they needed to retain certain pieces of data that, if you're even an enterprise user of OpenAI or ChatGPT, you might not be comfortable with the fact that that's being sort of retained. So just be aware that it is. It hasn't necessarily been actually ordered that that information be produced yet, but as everybody in the legal space knows, if it's being retained, there's a potential later on down the road that it might actually be produced. So just know that that order is out there, be aware, and just kind of think about that and assess it. I just want to point that out.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Otherwise, yeah, we would have left everybody hanging. So that covers our sections for today. Laura, Mark, Joan, thank you very much. We've got a couple of minutes left for questions. We've got a couple from participants. So I'm going to read it out, and then whoever wants to take it, take it. So I have a question about commingling of client data. Assuming that vendors, A, delete data after 3 months and do not train their model on one's data, then why is commingling more of a risk than the commingling which already takes place within law firms, e.g., in knowledge management systems and in attorneys' heads? So if I have an attempt at maybe summarizing that question, if a vendor's already saying they're deleting the data, and the vendor's already saying they're not using the data to train models, why is commingling an additional concern or risk or area to cover when you're assessing an AI vendor? I hope I've understood that question correctly.
I'm happy to take that.
Go ahead, Joan.
So I think, first of all, commingling of client data, even in knowledge management systems, I think there are things that can be commingled, like maybe anonymized financial information and things like that. But actual client data, at least at our firm, is not commingled with other client data. We just don't do it. And for a generative AI, a large language model, so it's different than a vendor. It's different than the vendor providing the service, right? So we use Opus 2. The data is up in Opus 2 until we no longer need it, right? Our client data is there. But when it goes out to the large language model, it does not stay there. And
Right.
with all of our vendors, it's the same. It does not stay, it does not aggregate, it doesn't add to the large language model. And I mean, large language models, it would be meaningless to them to have
To keep
our
it.
clients' data. That's not how a large language model works. So
Excellent.
it's
Joan, I'm so sorry to step in. That was a fantastic comment. I'm conscious of time. I think we're about to be
sorry.
cut off in about 15 seconds.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. Before I get immediately cut off, thank you, Joan. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Mark, for your really insightful contributions. For everyone that was attending, thank you for joining. I hope you took away something and got some valuable insights from our panelists here. If there were any questions, I know we didn't get to one in the chat. If there were any questions that you weren't able to submit, please do send them through. We'll answer them directly for you. And now I've got probably about time left over, so Joan can continue. But I just wanted to do the thank yous first.
I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, but
It's data being used to train LLMs. I remember.
yes, there we go. So the data, that's not how LLMs work. So anybody that tells you that they're using your client's data to train an LLM, you can refine an LLM, which is what we do in-house, right? With our work product. So it's very different than a commercial LLM. And essentially we don't work with vendors that that don't have that 0-day policy. So I hope that answers the question. I think there's a lot more questions there, which is interesting.
Oh, we've just had quite a few come through. Yes, it does. Thanks all. Okay, fantastic. Well, on that note, again, I was probably slightly premature, slightly scared of being cut off. Thank you, everybody.